500,000 children are currently in foster care. The county puts these on because they can match a lot of kids and parents quickly.
Look at the big kids.
Everybody's avoiding them. I'm gonna go and say hi.
But they're teenagers, okay? They use drugs and they watch people playing video games on YouTube. We're not equipped for any of that.
Hi! Just FYI, we can all hear you. It's okay. Go mingle with the kiddies and don't give it another thought. Bye-bye.
She was cool.
Lizzie comes with 2 younger siblings.
3 kids? Too much.
Oh,
Oh my God.
they're adorable.
Why would you show us that? That's wrong.
Here we are.
Make yourself at home because you're at home.
Do you like the Clippers?
Oh, I'm more of a Lakers fan. Oh no!
You hit me because I like the Clippers.
I think the Clippers are awesome. They were smart for trading Blake Griffin, their best player. All right, let me fix her, okay?
Thanks, Daddy.
I just got my first daddy. Oh, what?
You suck. I want some of that. Hey, honey, can I help you with anything?
No.
So I'm gonna give you guys a couple seconds to sit down. Or not. My name's Charlie Baker. I'm the governor of Massachusetts, and I'm the vice chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And I want to welcome you all to this conversation about child welfare, specifically rethinking child welfare. And the one thing I would say about that is we are constantly in the process of rethinking the way we deal with, support, and work with some of the most at-risk families and kids in our states. And we should be, because in many respects, these are some of our greatest challenges, and they represent, in many cases, the difference between opportunity and no opportunity for kids who, in many cases, through no fault of their own, end up in a particularly difficult spot. And I just want to make a couple of quick comments before I introduce the chair of the committee, Oregon Governor Kate Brown. The first is, I think one of the most important things we need to do to be successful in this space is recognize that our social workers, who do much of the work day to day with families and with these kids, need to be supported. And that means making the investments that are required to ensure that they're managing a reasonable number of cases, a reasonable number of families. The second is to make sure they have the clinical support that they need to support them as they make decisions with respect to the needs and the concerns and in many cases, psychological and medical issues that these kids and their families are often dealing with. And to the extent we can peel a lot of the administrative work away from the social workers so that they can really focus on doing social work and not on doing paperwork, we're going to dramatically improve their ability to do the work that they need to do. The second thing, and we've tried, all of those things, by the way, are things we've worked pretty successfully on in Massachusetts. The second thing we need to be better at is understanding and recognizing the role and the importance of placement and permanence when it comes to these kids. The more we can do to give them a sense of certainty about their future, the better off they will be. And whether that's working harder to develop kinship opportunities, where kids who have a mom or a dad or both who have problems end up staying with or being supported by and living with a family member, or ending up dealing with circumstance situations where we move kids in a reasonable time frame from some sort of state of uncertainty to a more certain state with respect to adoption or some other permanent relationship, the more likely they are to be successful. And then the third thing I want to mention is the work that we can all do to learn from each other with respect to those things that have ultimately determined the longitudinal success of these kids. Historically, states have not done a great job with respect to actually tracking, quote, what happens with respect to a lot of these kids and their families. The more we do to actually track this over time so that we can figure out which things really make a difference for them and for their families, the better off we're all going to be. This is a terrific panel. I think we're all going to learn a great deal from it. But as I said at the beginning, if you're not rethinking your child welfare policies and your child welfare programs every year, you ought to be, because this is the sort of thing where there's constant room for improvement and constant room for chance and opportunity for kids. I say all the time that talent is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. And the more that we can do to help make sure that these kids and their families have those opportunities, the better off they and we collectively will be. And with that, I want to turn it over to my tag team partner on this committee for the last several years. Oregon Governor Kate Brown and I have rotated between chairing and vice chairing the Health and Human Services Committee. She is now the chair, and I'm going to introduce her now. Kate?
Thank you, Governor Baker, for your extraordinary leadership on this issue and so many others. Good afternoon, everyone. I am honored to be here with you this afternoon and very excited about this panel. As governors, we have a truly unique opportunity to re-envision the way our child welfare system works in ways to better meet the needs of our children and families. And for me, this is a very personal issue. I first started practicing law in the juvenile justice arena, representing children and families in the foster care system. I then continued my work in this arena as a legislator, and now I have this opportunity as governor. And in my state, we have 1.5 times the national average, the number of children in our foster care system. So we're tackling those issues within our child welfare system, but as governor, I'm really focused on how we can address the root causes, the reason why we're seeing so many children come into the foster care system. So I am delighted to be introducing our panel that has been, that are experts in the area and that are really focused on reducing the number of children safely that are in our foster care system and hopefully better serve our children and families throughout the United States. So our moderator is Dr. Jeremy Cohenbahn. He's an author, advocate, and expert in child welfare and juvenile justice. He is the president and CEO of Children's Village, which cares for children through family support, community engagement, and short-term residential interventions. Sean Anders is a renowned writer and director who recently turned his personal experience with foster care and adoption into the Hollywood film Instant Family, starring Mark Wahlberg and Rose Byrne. Governor Bevin has made significant strides in Kentucky, streamlining and improving the child welfare system, with particular focus on improving adoption timelines and serving children and families impacted by the opioid crisis. And First Lady Edwards, she's focused on transforming the foster care system in Louisiana, particularly focusing on connecting foster parents with community supports and fostering cross-agency collaboration. I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Governor. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. First Lady Edwards, Governor Bevin, Sean, thank you for joining us. Before I ask you a few questions and we start talking about the work that we need to do together, let me set the stage as a practitioner. When it comes to helping children, the persistent theme in the United States has been that we often needlessly separate children from the one thing that they love and need the most, which is their parents, their siblings, and their family. In the United States, family separation has always been disproportionate. Poor families, and those families that society values the least, are at the greatest risk to losing their children. Few of us in this room would ever lose our children to the foster care system. In the early 1800s in New York City, where I work, the children we served, the ones that were separated, were initially Ashkenazi Jews and non-English speaking European immigrants. By the late 1800s and well into the first part of the 20th century, they were largely Irish Catholic. Today, and for the last 2 decades, most jurisdictions have seen an overrepresentation of Black and Native children in foster care. Black children enter the system faster, stay longer, and often exit with the worst outcomes. No question about that. In 2017, about 23,000 children aged out of foster care. when they turned 18 or 21, depending on the state that they lived in. We believe another 25,000 aged out in 2018, and at least the same number will age out this year. Let me tell you something about these kids that are aging out. Many who age out spent at least 5 to 7 years in the foster care system prior to aging out. The lucky ones, we think about 50% of that group, actually return to the very same families that we kept them away from, because that's all they had. The other 50% are struggling to survive. Some are couch surfing, as we spoke about earlier. Our girls are in very risky transient relationships, and they almost all remain dependent on government and charity. Let me also add that among this group, and for this group that ages out, we promised them a family, and we never gave them one. We never did. And many others never knew family. They actually came of age in institutions and group homes, including places like the Children's Village. 70 to 75% of the children that are separated from family are removed for neglect and not physical or sexual abuse. I know the general public often thinks that our kids are being removed for physical and sexual abuse. That's not true. Parent substance abuse is growing because of the opioid crisis. But the circumstances of neglect are most closely associated with poverty and abject poverty. That's it. So let me conclude my remarks by making 2 comments. Children do best in families. We're here to talk about that, the importance of family. In this great nation, we have more than enough families to care for all our children who are removed into foster care, including children with complex needs, no doubt about it. But one thing we must do, and I hope we'll get to talk about it a little bit more, we must begin treating those amazing foster families that step up as true partners. We do a horrible job at that. We can do more, and if anyone is interested, the CHAMPS campaign, fosteringchamps.org, talks about the things we can do together. With their help, and only with their help, can we transform the system. I will also add that group homes and institutions can play a role, and they're needed, but they can never be a place where kids grow up. The key to healing, as we all know, is the love and belonging of family. That's it. Or as my mother often reminds me, relationships heal. That's the magic balm. Relationships heal. Children should never belong to government or to a charity, even a charity like Children's Village. Government and charity can never be a substitute for the love of family. We are also on the cusp of some fundamental change in funding. It's called the Family First Prevention Services Act that President Trump signed in 2018. While not perfect, the Family First actually changes the perverse financial incentive that existed in federal funding. Because until Family First was signed, the only way you could draw down funding, the states could draw down funding, was to actually remove a child from a family. So unless you remove the child from the family, you were not eligible for that funding. With Family First, while not perfect, we think we can begin to build that preventive base, that early intervention that our communities so need, and maybe the number of children that are removed for neglect can begin to drop faster than we've begun to see. And when separation is needed, and there will be times, there are always times when we have to separate kids, Family First will allow us to build a family support network to keep them rather than an institution or a group home. That's the context for the conversation. Let me ask you a couple questions. First Lady Edwards, Governor Bevin, you put your reputations out on this, right? It's the least sexy of topics that you can pick. Child welfare, things are bound to go wrong. The media stories are never about the good things you do in child welfare. It's always about what went wrong. We admire your leadership. What are you most proud of, First Lady Edwards? What are you most proud of in Louisiana, since you've stuck your neck out and said, I'm behind kids, and you often talk about our kids?
Right. Well, one of the things I'm most proud of is my husband, John Bill Edwards, who went in and said he would not tolerate cuts to DCFS. And that one statement, that there would be no cuts to DCFS, really gave the caseworkers and all those people involved in that program, gave them a little backbone. And that really started the trickle down, where more people were listening and more, gave them hope, really, because the caseworkers themselves, we all know that they don't get paid enough, and they do some amazing work and more hours than we can even imagine. But to give them work and really start equipping them with what they need through even more programming and things that help them. But you know, that and the fact that we started our Louisiana Fosters website. We had 2 summits at the mansion to bring in people from all over the state to sit at the table and discuss what things we can do to change, and just starting that dialogue. And that's what I'm most proud of. So, yeah.
That's great. Governor Bevin?
Let me just say one thing to everybody that's in here. Thank you for being here, for the governors that are sitting here, for those of you that are here as well, because you have the option of walking out of the room and not paying attention to this. This isn't necessarily a sexy topic, you're right. There's no political constituency that's served by addressing this. Most of the people we're talking about, vast majority of the children themselves, are completely ineligible to vote. I would submit that there are a few less sexy things you could address, but we won't go there now. But the bottom line is this is something that has got to be addressed. We have in America 450 some odd thousand children in the foster care system. It's a little more than 1% of our population. And to your point, if we can't find within ourselves the ability to come alongside and be part of this solution, then we're not making a very valiant effort. And all the things we wrestle with, not the least of which is where we find funding for all these various programs, they come at the expense of not fixing this issue at the front end and not wrapping around. What you described in terms of early intervention is the wrapping around of a troubled situation, bringing the services that we always have, but are not always well applied. They often are applied at the end of the funnel of trouble instead of at the top end. And so I just am grateful to each and every one of you, and I want to draw your attention to one thing before I forget. There's at each one of the tables of the governors, and we have some more in the back of the room that will be given out, is a one-pager of just 10 things that every governor and anybody who cares about this issue in any state role should know. And they include things like how many kids are in your foster care system? What is the average wait time for someone to be adopted? You know, how many kids are aging out of your foster care system every year? How many people are living with family in what's, you know, often referred to as kinship care or maybe something else? How many such things exist in your states? If you don't know these 10 basic things, you're really failing to appreciate both the cost and opportunity cost. And the one thing you mentioned, and I'll touch on real quick, and then we can move to the next topic. You mentioned the cost to society of these young people once they age out. The average young person who ages out of foster care at the age of 18 without having a permanent family will cost, it's been estimated, and I think it's probably conservative, more than $300,000 per person over the course of their life, utilizing services that if we gave them the opportunity to be the solution and not the problem, could have been reversed. 34% of those who age out at the age of 18 will have had an adverse interaction with the criminal justice system by the time they are 19 years old. For women, and you alluded to it, it is almost a statistical given that their lives will be taken advantage of, that they will be trafficked, that they will be abused, that they will end up living in poverty, as will their children. We are failing at a rate and to a degree that we cannot afford, literally, financially or otherwise, societally, emotionally, morally, to fail. We can't afford it. And this is a problem when it's 1% of our kids that we have the absolute capacity to resolve this. And at a fraction of the price of actually fixing it once it's broken at the bottom. The final tiny thing I'll mention that you alluded to, and we talked about wrapping around and helping families. One thing I would challenge, it's not necessarily disagreeing with you, but challenging the notion of, there are some instances where the family, the biological family, is not the best solution for the child. And the earlier and quicker and more definitively and permanently that is determined in the development of that child, the better for all concerned. And so this, again, is maybe something we can talk about a bit more.
We agree. We think there are times when that decision needs to be made early. It's not a perfect science, though. We've got to work really hard at getting this right. And in those occasions, we should also expand our search to extended family first before we go out. But you're right. There's plenty of room here for improvement, Governor. Thank you. Sean, the Governor and the First Lady both set us up a little bit to talk about aging out teens and teens in the system. I mean, you capture this story so well in your movie. You introduce such humor. Tell us about the teens. You've met some teens, right? You and your wife, you had some interactions in the system. You went on to be adoptive parents of three siblings,
Yeah.
right? Where are we failing with our teens, and why are we failing so often? Why is it that people are so afraid of our teenagers?
Well, that's the perfect question, and I'm obviously not an expert. I'm a filmmaker and an adoptive dad.
You're a great storyteller.
Thank you. I'm also the only person here wearing jeans, so that's...
And the rest of us are jealous. That's all good.
That lowers the bar for my qualifications right there. But no, the last thing that you said there, why are they afraid? And that's, I can't even stress enough how huge that is. When you talk about all of these, everything else that we're doing almost falls underneath that. People are afraid of kids in care. I was. My wife and I went to an adoption fair. You saw a little clip of a version of it that's in the movie. We did not want to go anywhere near the teenagers because we were scared, and we just thought we're barely ready to be parents, let alone be parents of a teenager. And like as it happens in the movie, we wound up meeting this 16-year-old girl who was, you could just tell there was just something kind of amazing about her. We met her brother and sister, and we, with a lot of fear and trepidation, we wrote them down on our sheet, and we were matched with them. But in our true story, that didn't come to fruition because those kids had been in care for about 4 years. They were very much holding out hope that their mom was still coming for them, and they decided to refuse because it was an adoptive placement, and they decided to refuse the placement. So then they called us a short time later and just said, by the way, there's these other 3 siblings, and those are my kids who I love dearly and who are the best thing that ever happened to me. But when it came time to make the movie, I really wanted to have the story of a teenager in the movie because I knew that, where the need was there. And so in order to tell that story honestly, we sat down with a lot of families and a lot of kids who are now grown, who were adopted as teenagers. And many of them became part of our filmmaking process. And I guess the main message, and I don't want to take up too much time, but anything in your individual PR efforts where you can get away from grim statistics and all of these things that frighten people and just make people get feelings of pity and fear and trepidation when they think about these kids, any way that you can focus on story and let people tell their stories and let the kids tell their stories. Because when a kid comes out and tells who roots for a kid more, or who roots for any character more than a child who is overcoming adversity and goes on to do great things. So anyway, any chances you have to tell those stories and just make all of us less afraid of these kids, that'll go a long way.
Thank you. Let me switch this up a little bit. First Lady Edwards, when we were speaking in the green room, you spoke about your workforce. And that's not a question we had planned to get into, but are you comfortable talking a little bit about the workforce? We have people on the front lines making tough decisions, taking massive risks, sometimes losing their entire career when things go wrong, right? And we need our governors and our first ladies and our leaders to stand behind our workforce while demanding accountability. And you've done a pretty incredible job in your state in driving that message forward. Can you describe what you're doing and what you're seeing? And are there things that we should take away from this?
Well, I think when our governor put our Secretary of Department of Children and Family Services, Marquita Walters, in that position, that was a big move because she'd been in the system and been working with it for so many decades. And so just she alone brought so much, to that office. And so in that regard, so just dealing with the caseworkers, and I mentioned it earlier, but giving them what they need, training that they need. You know, we're really, so many of you heard of TBRI training them, but also, you know, helping them train other people that are dealing straight, you know, with a child, whether it's a teacher, a person in a classroom. You know, the everyday teacher doesn't understand the foster child maybe in a room of 25 and how to deal with that child and how to be a support system for that child. But teaching our, you know, working with our caseworkers and really lifting them up in their profession. I think we've been able to reduce the turnover from 23% to 13% just in 2 years, so that's pretty big.
To all of you, that's a stunning statistic in our field. Thank you, Mrs. Edwards. Thank you for being willing to stand behind the workforce, because a strong workforce is the only way that we keep and support those kids and those foster parents. Governor Bevin, you say a lot of interesting things, but there are some things that you say that resonate with me. You have questioned government's ability to get this job done. In fact, I heard you say that, you know, why would we demand and insist that government be the solution in this child welfare situation when it never has been? And I was reminded of my first experience when I was appointed at Children's Village. I was so excited to bring my mom, who has been my inspiration, to see my new position. And she walked around. It's a massive campus, 180, 200 acres, right outside New York City, beautiful. And we walked around, and as we went home, she said, "Son, that's terrible. Do those kids actually grow up there? Are you in charge of this? Are you?" And she's the one that reminded me. She said, "Look, government and charity can never be a solution to this. You have private partners in Kentucky that you are working with. What are your expectations of them?"
The reality is government does have a role. Everything I've said, I do agree. I mean, children should be raised by families, not by the government. But government has a role to facilitate an environment in which that is possible, to incentivize this, to reward this. And something you touched on that you all have done in Louisiana that's outstanding, that we've tried to do as well. In my very first budget address, we gave publicly in my State of the Commonwealth address raises to all the social workers and acknowledged them, singled some of them out, invited them to be there, talked about their stories. Why? Because they are struggling. This is a thankless, underpaid, emotionally demanding job. And they feel sometimes frustrated by the inaction of people in positions like ours. In acknowledging this and rewarding them and encouraging them, you asked about what kind of partnerships we look for. I'm going to brag on one that's not in our state because I've always been amazed by it. If you go into any Jordan's Furniture in New England and in Massachusetts, you walk into this is a place that's well known up there. They have these amazing, used to be books, and now video displays of kids. And you see kids that are just looking for a family to love them. And you see their stories and you get a backdrop. These are people, I don't know that government ever asked them to do it. I bet it didn't. But this is a private company who took it upon themselves to say, what is our role to be a good corporate citizen, to stand in the gap? And so we do have others as well in Kentucky. One thing that I did as well, you made a great point about marketing and PR. We just elevate this, then the solution exists. It exists in this room and with everybody we know. It does. The reality is, how is it that we make people aware of this situation? One thing I did when every one of us as governors once a year gets up and tells the people in our state how things are going. It's usually us standing there and everyone trying to stay awake and clap at the right times and wait till we're done. And we tell about good things, and I'm knocking us a little bit. Truth be told, these things tend to be fairly static. I actually showed a big picture on a screen while I was doing this, and it showed a picture of a family, a mother and a father and 3 kids, and every one of them had a number on their T-shirt. And their numbers range from 900 and something to some 4-digit number. And then I explained to people that these were the number of days that these individuals had each waited to get to resolution as it related to either their desire to adopt or their desire to be adopted. It was ridiculous. It was 3 to 4 years each. And yet there was a 100% desire on both ends to make it happen. And this was kind of shocking and sobering to people, but then I literally had that family come in wearing those T-shirts and walk right up onto the dais and take over my State of the Commonwealth address and speak to the entire elected assembly in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Do you think that had a pretty powerful impact on making this, elevating it in the awareness of the 138 men and women who will pass laws to make change? You bet. Far more than anything I could have ever done. In the next couple weeks after that, we passed one of the most comprehensive child care bills in the history of America. It's House Bill 1 from 2018 in Kentucky. Look at it. It's not perfect, like you have mentioned. There is no perfect anything, but there are things in it that if you're not doing it, I would encourage you to copy it. And if you have ideas we can steal from you, please tell us. But HB 1 2018 is how you put this out and get things done. And it breaks down the barriers of time so that we can get these kids, to your point and the impetus of this question, to the homes and not the institutions that are going to turn them into productive citizens.
Agreed. So all my prepared questions are gone because the governor and the first lady keep driving this conversation the way it should be. Let's talk about storytelling and changing the narrative. Governor Bevin, you took a chance. You got those T-shirts printed. You elevated the discussion. Sean, you're the storyteller. You bring this to life. You bring humor and reality together. What can we do more of? What are we missing here in telling this story? Because the media stories don't tell the story, right? They talk about things that do go wrong, often human tragedy that's scary. Sometimes we are wrong. Sometimes it's just something that we could not have controlled no matter how hard we work together. Things do go wrong. You know the system. What can we learn from you? You're the expert in storytelling. Well, what do we need to hear from you?
Well, the stories around foster care tend to fall into two baskets. Either the grim, you should do something because this is so terrible, or they fall into the a basket of sort of that has this sort of rosy sheen of charity on it. And things like seeing a real family in front of people, hearing their stories, and more than anything, what I can't stress enough is involve former foster youth, foster alumni in whatever programs you have, because when these kids go on to, whether they do great things like play for the Patriots or someone like Tiffany Haddish who can get up in front of the world and speak candidly, anytime that these kids can own their story, and there's so much shame wrapped around these kids, and anytime they can own their story and just come out and say, you know what, I was in this situation to no fault of my own, I got passed around from family to family, I have issues to work out because of it, but it made me stronger. Here's what I'm doing with my life now. When people can see that, it does two things. It makes the kids believe, hey, I don't have to fall into this stereotype of this kid who's just going to get lost in the gears of society. And it makes, equally as important, it just makes the general population see them differently and not be quite so afraid of them. So if somebody, so if you tell somebody, you know what, I saw this movie called Instant Family, and it inspired me to get involved in the foster care system, that instead of your friends and family saying, ooh, I don't know if that's a good idea, that they might be more supportive. In fact, we were just talking earlier that one thing I've been saying all over the country is that if you get pregnant and you go to a dinner party and tell people that you're expecting, nobody goes, ooh, you think that's a good idea? That kid could grow up to steal your car someday or be a drug dealer. I don't know if you should do that. But they just expect that the sky's the limit. It's just going to be nothing but ponies and rainbows. And yet, if you get involved in the system, the first place that people go to in their minds is like, ooh, trouble, trouble, trouble. So anything we can do to change that through story. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say, the Ad Council, they've been working on new ads around foster care, and they're doing great work. They're very compelling. Like I saw one of them.
We've seen
30 seconds long. I was in tears by the time it was over. So,
thank you, First Lady Edwards. You've done a lot of this work.
Well, I wanted to add to that about the children and the young people presenting. So we started in 2017, Louisiana Institute of Children and Families. A great group of people in Louisiana started that off of the national group CCAI. But to have these young people come during session and walk around and talk to our legislature and get in front of them and be in committees and talk about the aging out and the, raising it to 21. And it's powerful. It's, for them to speak of their own experiences, that is the seller. I mean, for them to say, I've been in, 20 different homes, and now, I was handed a blue folder and said, here you are. It's been, nice knowing you, and you're out on the streets and after that time. And so for them to come and present that and talk to the people that make the decision is extremely powerful.
Well, speaking of which, we have a gentleman here, Adrian McLemore. Where are you at, Adrian?
Right there.
He's right over there. We met him through the course of making the movie. Adrian works for the Annie Casey Foundation. Adrian grew up in the foster care system, and he also, in his home state of Ohio, he's part of a youth advisory board that is amazing, that I think everybody could learn something from, where they get foster alumni together to advise on all kinds of topics.
Yep.
So feel free to chat him up.
Yeah. Governor Bevan, let me... did you
I was
have
going to
some-
make one
Yeah,
little
please,
point
make
on
the
that
point.
too. And again, it sounds like these are repetitions on a theme, but to the extent you're not singing off this page in your states, please do, because my wife, the First Lady, started something called the Fly LC, which actually sounds kind of cool too, and it would work in every state because it's the First Lady's Youth Leadership Council. But it's comprised of exactly folks like this. And one of the first things that was done is we said to them, what are we not doing? From your perspective, how are your needs not being met? And the first two things they brought forward are now the law in Kentucky, which is, and I'll bet it's the case in many of your states, that kids in foster system without the approval of their birth parent, who may or may not either choose to or be in a position to give permission for them to get a driver's license at 16, could not even be considered until they were an adult, and these kids couldn't even get a driver's license. That's insane, and I guarantee it's in a number of your states already. And for good intention, but really no good reason. And so that was one of the first things they said is, why can't we drive? We can't get jobs, we can't have a life. And so they brought that forward. That was taken care of. Fictive kin, if that term doesn't mean anything to you, it's F-I-C-T-I-V-E. Google it up. We don't need to discuss it now, other than to say fictive kin is not available in every state. It should be. In short measure, it allows someone who's not family but might be a trusted coach or a teacher or a neighbor or a pastor or a whoever to, for a temporary period of time with no financial or legal specifically mandated responsibility, be able to provide for that child on an interim basis while the parent might be on parole or going through rehab or what have you, the ability to stand in the gap. And that fictive kin and that driver's license bill have changed the lives of so many. It took nothing. You bring these kids in and have them talk to legislators and things get done. The other thing, too, about the voices, there's a guy named Frank Harshaw in Kentucky who owns a large train dealership, HVAC dealership. He was a foster care kid. There's someone like him in every one of your states. Find someone who's been there, who has been blessed like you have, who have risen up and done extraordinary things, and then in turn wanted to give back. Give them the opportunity to do it. They will be great advocates, and they will also find other folks, back to your earlier question, who can be partners in this, because the solutions are out there. We just need to empower people with the ability to get plugged in, because this is 1% and some change of our entire population. We can do this.
Oh, good. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to jump off something that you said, Sean, and I'm going to ask you the question first, Governor Bevan, and then First Lady Edwards. You reminded us that these kids they come into care due to no fault of their own, right? But very quickly they get labeled as bad, as broken, as troublemakers. And we need to own some of that, because we are the ones that take them away from their family. Governor Bevan, you have a large, inclusive family. You adopted, is it 4?
4 of our 9 children.
4 of your 9 children. I know you make it easy. I watched you on some videos. But hey, look, I'm a parent of 3. I know there's nothing easy with kids. Was there anything instructive in your and the First Lady's experience as adoptive parents that would remind us that these kids are just normal kids that want to be loved unconditionally by at least one person, right? Somebody to love them. Yep. Talk to us about it. And First Lady Edwards, I want you to think about your own children and talk to us about what you do and what the governor does.
I'll keep this tight because it's true. And it made me laugh at the very beginning when you said people's response was to be afraid of teenagers. Well, heck, if you've ever had a teenager, it doesn't matter whether they were born to you or not, you were probably afraid of them at some point, or at least they wanted you to be. The bottom line is this: it doesn't come with a manual, whether they're born to you or adopted. The reality is, in some measure, ironically, through adoption, you have more ability to have an awareness of what's coming than when they're born to you, to your point. And so to that end, what kids need is someone to love them. In short measure, years ago, more than 10 years ago, my wife and I tried to adopt a child out of the foster care system. And to make a very long story short, at the end of well over a year and multiple fingerprints and multiple checks and multiple home studies and multiple inspections and thousands of dollars being sent all over the place, sometimes duplicative and sometimes because something expired and you had to go back and do it again because by the time the next stage got done, it was insane. And at the end of all of that, we were told that, you know what, you already have 5 children, that's enough, because this child would be the 6th child and she wouldn't get enough attention. It's better for her to stay in the system. She was 11 years old. Wow. She'd been in 14 homes. She is an adult somewhere. It probably has not turned out well. There was no logic. This is the first political job I've ever had. I was nowhere near the political world. But I remember at the time thinking, how outrageous that a family that could take care of 5 would be deemed as unable to take care of 6, and that it's better for that child to end up with nothing as a result. And I thought something should be done about it. Well, this is it. We're it. You're it. I mean, we can do something about this at the end of the day. And the final thing I'll say on this is that, yes, 9 is a lot. Governor DeWine is here. You have 8 children, I think. He knows a little bit about a lot, too, as do some others in this room. The bottom line is this: of course it's a lot. But having more children than hands, which is 3 or more, is the equivalent of, it's the parenting equivalent of terminal velocity. It just is. It doesn't matter if you fall from 100,000 or 10,000 or 1,000. You hit a certain speed, that's it. Once you have more children than hands, which is 3, you are there. The only thing that will really change in your life with absolute certainty is what you drive, and the cool factor of what you drive will go down rapidly. That said, nothing else really changes, so it's 100% doable. And I would say this in closing: if you are not in a position to adopt, or you are not in a position to foster, you know somebody that you could come alongside and help with an encouraging word, with a meal prepared, with an offer to be their backup so they can have a date night, with the ability to say, listen, I notice you got 3 kids that are the ages of mine were 3 years ago. I got a closet full of stuff. Why don't you come over if you want any? Little simple stuff. This is so easily fixed if we all actually get engaged. So my point is it a lot? Sure. And let me just finally say, the true secret to me making it look easy is because of my wife. So let's be completely honest about it. I get to make it look easy. She's the mother of 9 children. God bless her. So, but be a part of the solution.
How many points does he get for that? I mean, that's a lot of points.
And at one point, speaking of teenagers, until our oldest turned 20 a couple months ago, I had 16 to 7 teenagers in our house at one time. Some born to us, some not. 6 of them were girls. So I'm just saying, it can be done. Can be done.
We all aspire to be like Governor Babin, but First Lady Edwards, every time I hear you speak, you describe children in foster care as our children.
They are.
I mean, you never forget to do that. Talk to us about that.
Well,
why is it so important to you to capture that image?
Because they are our children, and you know, you were talking about the people that can wrap themselves around it. You know, at any given time, we have over 4,000 children in foster care in our state, and I always say we have over 4,000 churches, and at every church would recruit one family within that church, and then that one family wrap themselves around that child. We could do amazing things. We have a group in New Orleans called Crossroads NOLA, and their church is using the faith-based community, and they're starting to duplicate this all across our state, but where they're recruiting families within the church. And then the church wraps themselves around, you know, that family who's the adoptive family. But some other programs, Open Table is doing some remarkable things in our state within the church. And so getting people to wrap themselves around those foster parents and giving them the help and support they need, that's a big plus. That's especially when you have as many as you do. But I'm just to encourage, you know, one of the things that came out of our summit and our website, LouisianaFosters.org, was to have a place, a networking place where we have, you know, wonderful nonprofit groups we have Go Bags. Of course, we spell it different than everybody else, G-E-A-U-X. Go Bags, and we have other Braveheart that they're doing amazing things by collecting things in a bag where that child is taken in the middle of the night. They have a bag of goods and things they can take with them. They're just networking and letting everybody know that these things are available. So that's what we wanted to, you know, do with the Louisiana Fosters, is have a place where everybody could go and say, oh, how can I help? I can't foster a child, but I can help with resources, or I can help with tutoring, or I can help, you know, help with some lessons of Little League or dance. But everybody can be a part of this equation. They just have to find out where they fit.
Thank you. We've got 3 minutes left. Let's take a minute each. Sean, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway? How do we change this?
Well, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention that we're working on right now with with a group of foster alumni. We're creating, for lack of a better word, a logo that is like a pride logo that we are going to roll out in the next couple of months. We're going to try to really bring this thing nationwide and hopefully worldwide. Right now, kids in care, they carry a lot of shame, a lot of needless shame. And they are so strong, they're so tenacious, they are so resilient, and they never get credit for these things that unfortunately come from a difficult place, that when you are, you know, battling against great odds, you also cultivate great qualities that you should be able to be proud of. So we're, thank you. I'm going to talk to you about this for sure. And by the way, thank you, all of you who are here to talk about this. But we want to bring this out so that kids can have something on a hat, on a T-shirt, on you know, wherever, and a conversation piece. So instead of being ashamed of who they are, that they can say, no, this represents, you know, where I come from, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm happy to tell you my story.
Thank you. Governor Bevan, 30 seconds, and then we'll give Mrs. Edwards
Sure,
a minute.
No. I mean, I would simply say this again. Thank you for being here. You are the solution. If you think nothing can be done about this, you're right. I beg to differ, and I think we can do something about it, and I think we will. I would simply say this. We're pouring all in Kentucky. We're happy to share anything that we are doing with any of you, and we're happy to learn anything that you would like to share with us. This year, in 2019 in Kentucky, every one of you, governors and every first spouse, is going to be invited to come to summits that are going to involve a whole lot of people that you know from the world that you come from who care about this and are pouring in. That will be an attraction in some measure, but they're people who want to see solutions to trafficking and adoption and foster care needs. We're going to be having a number of summits and meetings in Kentucky. We want every governor to come, please. You will find it time well spent. We will be concentrated in this effort, and the bottom line is, let's just get out there and fix it. And thank you so much for having this panel.
One of the things I failed to mention was our Marquita Walters started QPI, which is a Quality Parent Initiative, and it is, instead of piloting the program, she's done it statewide, which has been a game changer. And so that's been so helpful. One of the things I said, our children, the foster children, are our children, and they are our future. And if we don't invest in these children, our children, then we're not investing in our future. And so it's just a no-brainer. So I'm excited to be a part of this movement and elevating the conversation and bringing awareness and everybody talking about it and figuring out and making it less intimidating, like you said, you know, especially when it comes to teenagers, and really just bringing the awareness and educating people on the whole.
I think you just did.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good job. Awesome. Well done.